We're making history today. This is the first time in the history of this Parliament that people with disabilities have secured a debate in this chamber on an agenda of their choosing. So let's pay tribute to the War on Welfare campaigners, the WOW campaigners, who initiated this campaign, who drafted the petition that we have before us in motion form, and who worked so hard for a year to gather over 100,000 signatures and secured this debate. They're heroes and heroines who worked, many of them despite their disability, to ensure this campaign was a success. MPs may speak in this debate, but it's the voice of the WOW campaigners and petitioners that will be heard. What do the WOW campaigners want from this debate? Well, what they've said is they want a serious debate. We want MPs, we want party spokespeople, and we want ministers to listen, and just listen well to the statements that they've made. And what do they want us to say? Well, I've asked WOW petitioners, what do you want me to say and other MPs to say in today's debate? And they've said, we want you to get across as best you can what the welfare changes have brought in over the last 4 years have meant to us and our families, the stark reality. Why do they want this? Well, maybe naively, they believe that if MPs and ministers really knew what it's like, what disabled people are going through, they would not stand by and let fellow human beings suffer and be degraded in this way. Yeah. Certainly.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way and congratulate him on getting this important debate. Ahead of this debate, the Brighton Housing Trust sent me some really alarming data of 25 cases they'd looked at of claimants of ESA. All of them won their appeal and had the decision overturned. In 72% of cases, the decisions were overturned on the basis of a mental health condition, and 32% of that sample group stated that the process had caused an increase in suicidal intention. Does he agree with me that the implications of this policy are literally a matter of life and death?
Completely. The figures in Brighton are echoed right the way around the country and have been reported now for the last number of years. We met some of the disabled campaigners this morning, Mr. Speaker, and some of them said these expressions. Do they realise that many of us feel terrorised by what the government is doing? One disabled campaigner said to me this morning, can you tell them that they call their programme Fulfilling Our Potential, but we feel that many of us simply won't survive this round of cuts. A generation is going to be lost. That's why the central demand of this petition is very straightforward. Today's motion is to call, in essence, for a cumulative impact assessment of all the welfare changes that have been introduced by this government. And the argument that they've put forward is that if politicians and society only knew the full effect of all these changes on the lives of disabled people and their families, surely they would not let this happen in a civilised society. Well, let's see. Let's see whether we can move hearts and change minds in this debate. Let's run through some of the figures. There are 11.3 million people with disability in the UK. Of these, 4.5 million have a significant disability that entitles them to a disability benefit like disability living allowance or attendance allowance. 2.7 million people with disabilities live in poverty. And it's this group that the welfare cuts are hurting the most. I remember in 2010 when the government launched its austerity programme to cut public spending. I remember the Prime Minister's own statements. To quote the Prime Minister in October 2010, it's fair that those with broader shoulders should bear a greater load, and the greatest burden would be placed on the better off. The cuts, if they were to be made, would be fair. Well, the reverse is the case. I urge members to read the report, at least one of the reports, the report by Simon Duffy, the Director for Welfare Reform. He explains in his report, Counting the Cuts, that disabled people in poverty are bearing the cuts 4 times worse than the average, whilst people using social care have a burden nearly 6 times the burden on the average person. Other reports have actually escalated that to maybe 20 times the burden falling on people with disabilities. And the reason is because disabled people are being hit by a combination of cuts in funding for social care and support, and by wave after wave, almost annually, of cuts in welfare benefits. Let's look at the cuts in care and support. Many disabled people rely upon local authorities' social care and support. By next month, there will be £2.68 billion will have been cut out of adult social care budgets across the country. In 2012 and 2013, 320,000 fewer disabled people received local authority social care than in 2005-2006. 37,000 fewer adults between 18 and 16 with physical impairments received social care support than in 2005-2006. 30,000, there's been a 30,000 reduction of adults with mental health issues receiving care and support. Certainly.
Does my honourable friend agree that having decent social care isn't just about helping people cope with their disabilities, it's about helping them live an ordinary life that the rest of us would take for granted, being able to get up, washed, dressed and fed, spend time with their families, go out into the community, as well as being able to work if they can. Isn't that why the cuts in social care have been so devastating?
It's exactly that people feel they're so harsh in the impact.
Am I on a friendly way?
Let me just finish this point. Many local authorities have changed the eligibility criteria. That's the problem. And they've changed it to cover only those people with substantial needs. Automatically, that cuts out about 100,000 people from receiving any form of social care whatsoever.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. And would you agree with me that this is very much a false economy? Because by cutting back on social care, it inevitably means that people's conditions tend to deteriorate, and then they need more urgent care, and many of them will find themselves in hospital. And so consequently, the cost to the public purse is substantially greater by making these false economy, these cuts, which are so devastating to disabled people.
It's exactly that. There are three consequences of what's happening. First of all, what's happening now is that disabled people are forced more and more to rely and depend on care from their own families. And family members who themselves, to be frank, are overstretched in caring for a family member, especially as local authority respite care is now being cut back so dramatically. And startlingly, as we've found in a previous debate, a large number of these carers are children caring for their parents. There was a year-long investigation by the Carers UK which confirmed that carers who save this country an estimated £119 billion a year in care costs, and they're about to lose £1 billion in benefit cuts. The second point is that many of the care needs of many disabled people are simply not being met at all. And there's a recent inquiry by the All-Party Group on Local Government and Disability. They found out, taking evidence, that 4 in 10 disabled people are failing to have their basic social care needs that have been met. My honourable friend points to the sort of social care we're talking about. But this third is the point that my honourable friend made. The withdrawal of social care and support service is just cutting many disabled people off from any forms of social contact with the outside world. It's driving many back into their homes and some into residential care. People are being forced out of their homes, losing all the independence, forced out of their homes and into residential care or even hospital care as a result. Alongside the cuts to social care are the mounting cuts in welfare benefits. The vast majority of disabled people I've met, and most of us have met, are desperate to work. They're desperate to live like any other employed person, supporting their families with a regular wage. But for some, the tragedy is that their disability is so severe that they'll never be able to work, and they will need to rely upon welfare benefits to ensure they don't live in poverty. For others, what they need is positive and sensitive practical support to help them get back into work or into work at all. The system that's been introduced over the last 6 years to support people in securing work or the appropriate benefits could not have been designed better to undermine the ability of disabled people to get into work or receive the appropriate benefits to assist them. The last government started the process of reassessing all those on incapacity benefit to see if a person could be assisted back into work, and if not, to ensure that they had the right level of financial support. It introduced the work capability assessment and brought in Atos to implement it. In theory, it might have been well-intentioned, but in practice, thousands of disabled people have been caused untold suffering, humiliation, stress, and at times, absolute despair.
Would the honourable gentleman also recognised that the introduction of the work capability assessment under his government and my government and our government was actually in a phased way, And part of the distress that the gentleman, my honourable friend, has mentioned has been due to the fact that that contract was renegotiated and we went for a big bang of assessments and reassessments for everyone who was on incapacity benefit.
The capability assessment was flawed from the start. It stemmed from the work of the American insurance company Unum. It was this so-called biosocial model of disability assessment, and that was exposed as an invention by the insurance company simply to avoid paying out claims. But my honourable friend is right. Atos was brought in and then given a contract to churn through large numbers of assessments very rapidly in recent years, as fast as possible. And to do this, the staff that were employed often had minimal medical or professional qualifications, and often with expertise or experience totally unrelated to the person's condition or disability they were assessing. The assessment largely disregarded the person's existing diagnosis, prognosis, or even life expectancy. The recent Panorama programme, Disabled or Faking It, exposed the scandal of seriously ill patients diagnosed with life-threatening conditions such as heart failure and end-stage emphysema being found fit for work. The so-called descriptors or criteria on which the assessment is based bear no relation to the potential employment available, take little account of fluctuating conditions, and are particularly unresponsive to appreciating mental health issues. And yes, according to all the DWP figures, that the appeals roll in 40%, and most of the appeals now are being successful. The test has been condemned by the BMA, the RCN, and the report by the President of the Appeals Tribunal to the Government denounced the test as failing to coincide with reality. Even where a person wins their appeal, there can be a lengthy time wait for reinstatement of benefits, and in one period there were 37,000 people waiting up to a year to receive their benefits after they'd won their appeal. Certainly.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that the cuts to the legal aid system, which take away the right of people to get legal aid for welfare benefit appeals, have also caused additional distress to those that are sick and disabled who are seeking an appeal?
It's interesting that the statistics all prove that those people who are represented are winning their appeal in vast numbers. Those who are not are suffering. So it's no wonder, to be frank, that 84% of GPs have reported that they have patients who are presented with mental health problems such as stress, anxiety, depression as a result of undergoing or the fear of undergoing the work capability assessment. It's for all these reasons that the BMA has called for the end of the WCA with immediate effect. The BMA believes it should be replaced with a rigorous and safe system that does not cause unavoidable harm. There are such systems used in other countries. Why can't we use them here? That's why the motion calls for the scrapping of the WCA. If a person is assessed as capable of work and put onto employment support allowance within the work-related group, contributory ESA now only is lost after 12 months. 700,000 disabled people lose £4.4 billion as a result of the 12-month cut-off. There's been a massive escalation in the use of sanctions against people on ESA or job seekers allowance. 900,000 people sanctioned last year.
In relation to the one-year cut-off, is it not at the very least ironic that the people who are most affected by this are people in households who have a for example, a working partner or have small savings, and that they're very so-called hard-working people that the government said it wanted to protect?
People thought they were contributing to a scheme that they would get the benefits from. Now they're finding they've contributed and will no longer get those benefits. That's unjust. 1 in 5 of those sanctioned on GSA were disabled people. Sanctions mean the loss of benefits altogether for weeks or even months. And it's compounded, as my honourable friend has said, by the increasing difficulty to find securing just advice or advocacy to appeal and challenge sanction.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I wondered if he was aware of the situation that one of my constituents was in, who was receiving ESA. He was having a heart attack during his assessment, and he was sanctioned as a result of leaving that. I've called for the government for an independent review for the inappropriate use of sanctions. They committed to that in the Select Committee, and now they're reneging on this. Isn't this a disgrace?
Example after example have been brought forward by members like that, who simply looked for some compassion and also some logic in the governance of this system, and the government have ignored that tragically. What's happened as a result of the sanctions is basically many people now reporting that they're dependent on doorstep loans. They're using credit card for everyday items, and some have now fallen into long-term debt. Some of us met a representative from Disability UK on Monday. He described all this as a route into destitution for many people. Disabled people on ESA are placed on the work programme and offered support from work choice. The latest figures on the work programme success rate of finding disabled people employment shows that only 5.3% secured employment, 95% failure rate. Work choice is meant to assist those with complex needs, has helped only 58 people since 2011. The forced closure, if I may, the forced closure of the Remploy factories under this government has also taken away the opportunity of sheltered work for many thousands of disabled people.
I thank the Honourable Friend for giving way. I visited my local work choice provider just the other week, and I was amazed to discover that the benefit that everyone who was there who was participating was on was job seekers allowance. They weren't on a disability benefit, although they did have disabilities. And that is not what I thought work choice was meant to be about.
Exactly. That's reports comes back from constituency member after constituency member on the visits. I'm concerned about time, so I'll press on, Madam Deputy Speaker, without any further interventions, if members don't mind. Let me just turn now to the personal independence payments. 3.2 million people, disabled people, receive DLA. DLA is not a work benefit. It's meant to help with the additional costs of disability. It allows disabled people to get by and overcome some of the restrictions forced upon them by their disability. From April 2013, the DLA is supposed to be gradually replaced with PIPs, the personal independence payments. I urge members to read today's National Audit Office report assessing the rollout. Let me just quote. The report states that backlogs have developed at each stage of the claimant process. Both the department and the assessment providers have processed fewer claims than expected. By October, the department had made only 16% of the number of decisions expected. Over 166,000 people had started new claims for PIP, and 92,000 claims have been transferred to the assessment provider and not returned to the department. Who's the assessment provider? After the WCA debacle, it's hard to believe that the government has allowed Atos to share the contract with Capita. The report goes on to say that claimants face delays and the department is not able to tell them how long they're likely to wait, potentially creating distress and financial difficulties. The report cites the CAB as having found claimants that are concerned about paying for their care, covering their housing costs, and just having enough money to pay for necessities like heating, electricity and food. The Demos scope study calculated that 600,000 people would be impacted upon by the introduction of PIP, a loss of £2.6 billion. Let me just turn to mobility. In addition to all these changes in eligibility, there's been changes to eligibility for mobility. It means that 148,000 people will lose out on that additional benefit. And it also potentially denies access to a mobility vehicle. So we now know today many people are having their mobility cars removed, and the irony is, as a result, they can't get to work. But disabled people are not immune and especially vulnerable to other benefit changes. The bedroom tax. Disabled people will be disproportionately hit by the bedroom tax. 72% of households affected include someone with a disability or major health problem. 420,000 disabled people will lose, on average, £14 a week in housing benefit. 1 in 3 disabled people are being refused the discretionary housing payment. Shockingly, local councils have rejected applications from disabled people living in adapted properties who are unable to downsize. And last week it was also revealed that the £347 million local welfare assistance fund to local councils had quietly been cut by the government. The Welfare Reform Act also changed the uprating of benefits from RPI to CPI. It costing some families receiving DLA and carers allowance £80 a week. The benefit cap. It's estimated that 142,500 disabled people will be hit by the benefit cap, costing £2 billion. Universal credit looms over all of this. The CAB's research estimates that 116,000 disabled people could lose £40 a week. 230,000 severely disabled who live alone or with only a young carer will get between £28 and £58 less a week. 100,000 disabled children will lose £28 a week. What do all these figures add up to? Well, although the Government has refused to undertake a cumulative assessment of all these benefit changes on disabled people, others have. The Demos Scope study calculated that disabled people will lose £28.3 billion by 2018. Dr Simon Bamber concludes that disabled people in poverty, who make up 4% of the population, will bear 13% of the cuts. They'll lose £4,660 a year. People using social care, who make up 3% of the population, also will bear 13% of the cuts. They'll lose £6,409 a year. In reality, let me just come to some conclusion. In reality, what does it mean? It means poverty for many. Not enough income to adequately heat your home. Nearly 1 million disabled people now in fuel poverty. Choosing not to eat so that your children can eat. Feeling shamed and humiliated by having to rely upon the generosity of others and the support from the food bank. And for some, and I urge people to go onto the website Callum's List, it's all too much for some, and you become another in a coroner's report whose suicide is associated with loss of benefits. Many of the disabled people I've met say the same thing. They tell me they feel hounded. They feel hounded by the media, by politicians and by this government just for being disabled and claiming the benefits they're entitled to. What the WoW campaigners are demanding today is the truth. They want a cumulative impact assessment of all the welfare changes so that the truth of their plight can be revealed. They believe, and I say maybe naively, but they believe if the truth was told, no decent society would allow its most vulnerable members to be treated in this way. That's why I supported the petition, that's why I support the motion today, and that's why I will be seeking a vote on the motion. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.